it involves Dana, even on the shows she's not involved in. So that's kind of weird. So I just do the music thing. All right, let's do this. Let's start with this. Wait, we'll bring that in later. I'll fly that in. I've got your Twitter handle we're going to put up there too. All right, here we go. Welcome back to the Field Gulls Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Viennes, and we're going to be talking Seahawks Saints today. But we're also going to kind of open it up and make it a more wide-ranging, sort of big-picture show. As you can see, those of you who are watching the live streaming video version, my old friend Bill Alvstad of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast is joining me. It's been a minute since we've caught up, Bill, and talked some Seahawks football. First of all, how are you? How are things?
Hey, Dan. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to talk Seahawks football with you always. It's always a pleasure. Things have been going good. A few surprises with the Seahawks this year. We can talk about all of that. Right. A couple of disappointments worked in there as well. We kind of expected that. Maybe not exactly where we thought they would come from. But overall, I'm happy with the season so far, considering the expectations going in.
Well, I'll say this: you and I, especially when Keith joins us, we have a history of podcast episodes that are not concise, not short. We can get into
that
things.
Is true.
We've literally, for those of you who have never heard us do a show together, we've literally done a 3-hour show before. Now, obviously, that was special circumstances, but today we have a 3-hour time limit because I got a baseball game to watch.
Go Mariners!
Rocking the Mariners gear today. I don't know those of you watching the stream, if you can tell what the background is. That's the big dumper, Cal Raleigh hitting the walk-off home run to send him to the playoffs. Raleigh hitting cleanup today, by the way, for the Mariners as they take on the Toronto Blue Jays in Game 1 of the AL Wildcard Series.
I was lucky enough this spring training, Dan, to watch Julio Rodriguez hit that inside the park home run. His first home run as a Mariner in spring training, and I was at that game, and I was so excited for the kid at the time, and I thought, man, this kid's going to be special. You know, it was like his third game or something like that, and you could already tell that. And at that moment, it hadn't yet been decided if he was going to start or if he was going to play a key role in the game. That looks so long ago now.
Yeah.
That it now it's just funny to think about that player at that moment, wondering if he was going to be a part of the nucleus of the team, this year, if he was ready. Man, he blew everybody's socks off. That was crazy.
Well, and look, it brings something to mind for me. I know that, people listening now, they might be thinking, hey, this is a Seahawks podcast, get to football. But there's probably a lot of crossover. A lot of Seahawks fans are most likely Mariner fans. And I'm going to try to tie this back in later because we're going to talk a little bit later in the show, just kind of about the, whatever you want to call it, the rebuild or the reset as a whole. And there's some parallels because the Mariners are at the tail end of that process now, and it worked for them. It doesn't always work. And so we're in the first phase of this, the Seahawks rebuild, and some things are working and some things aren't. And I want to start with that. We're we're not 16. It's not symmetrical anymore. That's the thing I hate about the 17-game seasons. After 4 games used to be the quarter poll, and you take a look back at the first quarter of the season. We're not quite there yet, but the team's 2-2. Like you said, some good surprises, some bad surprises. I want to ask you just generally, what's the best thing you've seen so far, and what's the worst thing you've seen so far?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that I've seen so far that have qualified as being the best. I mean, Geno Smith, come on now. I want to hand it to him first and foremost because we were all kind of hard on him. I think there wasn't too many pundits out there, guys that do what we do, talking about the Seahawks all the time, thought that Geno Smith was going to come in and do what he's doing right now. There's always that opportunity, but man, talk about a real good story. probably the best story in the NFL right now as far as a comeback guy, getting his opportunity for the first time in a long time and surpassing expectations on almost every level. No. And you got to hand it to both him and Pete Carroll. Really, let's give Pete Carroll some due. I know that, there's a mixed bag out there on Pete, but let's break this down a little bit. Guy shows up for Geno Smith right out of the gate, says he's going to give him the best chance to be successful, and Geno's got to go take the job, but it's his job to lose. And then Pete made the decision to go with Geno Smith as the quarterback. They made that decision early, along with John Schneider, not to draft a quarterback, not to bring in another high-level veteran to compete for that job. And Geno is kind of proven Pete right. And so far, now you've got to take a look at the competition level. I agree with that. You got to take a look at the Lions. Obviously, the Broncos defense was good. The 49ers defense is great. But really, if you take a look at it, Geno's played a good, say, half the games so far. As far as halves, you kind of divide these things into halves. Some first halves in these games have been great, second halves not so much, etc. I put a complete game against the Lions together, which was outstanding to see. So Geno, it is definitely one of those things that has been one of the best. And then the rookies, Keith, or not Keith. I keep wanting to call you Keith because I'm so used to recording with him. Dan, the rookies.
You can play a drinking game every time.
You got to take a look at Abe Lucas and Charles Cross at the tackle position for the offensive line for the Seahawks. I mean, you knew that Charles Cross was going to take that job going in, but Abe Lucas, now we talked about Abe Lucas, and I think you were on that train too, as being kind of an early guy that you were looking at prior to the draft, that he could have a chance and he would be a good fit for the Seahawks. And sure enough, came to the team and has really exceeded expectations there. And so the duo being there for possibly the next decade, anchoring that offensive line is just a huge deal for this team. And then on the other side, Tariq Woolen, same sort of deal as Abe Lucas, came in not maybe quite ready, a project, if you will, had all the physical attributes that you could ask for out of that position, and then some, and then goes out and shows that he's ready immediately. Again, Pete made the decision to insert him into the starting lineup early in the preseason, and he hasn't relinquished it. And now he looks like a perennial Pro Bowler in the waiting for this team, and that's just super exciting.
It's the thing I love about Woolen is it's not just that he's holding his own. I mean, I think we all just assume coming out of a small college, only having played corner for the last 2 years after playing wide receiver previous to that, that it's not just that he looks overmatched or out of place. He makes plays. He makes impact plays. In every game, he does something to impact the game. He has the only 2 interceptions on the season, the only 2 interceptions by a Seahawk corner in a long time. He blocked the field goal. Like, the guys have a knack for that. And we're seeing some of that out of Kobe Bryant maybe as well. But the fact that he's never out of position. Well, there was a play here or there. There was a play that he kind of got ahead of the receiver down the sideline. He was a little premature in turning to run with the receiver last week, and the receiver undercut the throw from Goff, and it was a big game. But it wasn't. He's never blowing coverages. He's never in the wrong place. He's not letting guys run by him. He's had a couple penalties, but they're only because he's aggressively playing man-to-man defense, and he's in a good space. He looks like, after all these years of the Seahawks trying to find young corners and failing, the Trey Flowers experiment, even Shaq Griffin, good player. But even he, I think one of the things that frustrated us as Seahawks fans was Shaq Griffin was a talented player physically and always seemed to be in position, but didn't make the play. Didn't get his hands on the ball, didn't have good ball skills, didn't, get a lot of turnovers. So to see a guy 4 games into his career look like an ascending player and a guy that could lock that position down for a long time, that's a bonus. Now, however, there's good and there's bad, right? For every win, there's a loss, it seems like. And to me, the worst thing I've seen so far, other than our linebacker play as a whole, and we can get into that if we want to, but it's Darrell Taylor. I think the last time we talked, we did kind of a season preview, and I think I predicted he was going to get 14 or 15 sacks I told you that on the record, on the air. He just looks out of place. He looks physically overmatched. I don't know what happened to the player that we saw last year. I don't know if it's just that he's not a fit with the new scheme or something there is, or if maybe his game was limited and teams have figured out how to block him. I don't know, but he's been a huge disappointment, and we're not the only ones that he's disappointed, because now he's giving up snaps to another rookie, Boye Mafe. It was Daryl Johnson before that, and Daryl Taylor may be playing less and less.
Daryl Taylor, you did predict that, and so did everyone else. Everyone was kind of on the Daryl Taylor train. He was ready to step up into an accelerated role this year. He was going to go from being on that line on a 4-3 defense as a Leo player full-time to being more of a well-rounded linebacker, if you will. He was going to drop back into coverage. He was going to set the edge. He was going to rush the passer. So far, we've not seen any of those things this year. They've used his aggression offenses against him to get him out of position, and he's not recovered well. And his sideline to sideline abilities seems to be inhibited this year, and he's not looking very good in coverage. And he's probably the biggest disappointment on defense if you don't count Cody Barton. Cody Barton is a player that was going to now assume a larger role. I thought if there's one thing, if you could take a look at John Schneider and Pete Carroll this offseason in a position that they didn't adequately address, and sometimes every year there's one of those. This is the position this year. They didn't really address this middle linebacker position, at least for depth, as well as I thought that they could. And now we're kind of paying for that a little bit. Cody Barton is not ready for prime time. Daryl Brooks is out of position, quite frequently as well. And they're making a ton of tackles, but those are coming 5-6 yards past the line of scrimmage, which also points to line of scrimmage problems up front. You got Quentin Jefferson up there. They're asking maybe a little too much of Quentin Jefferson to kind of defend the run, and he's not equipped to do that. He's a forward player. He wants to play forward and disrupt the passer and the pocket, and he's good at that. But when they ask him to do more than that, he just doesn't hold up physically. And so you're seeing some breakdowns there up front, and then Daryl Taylor and Cody Barton and Brooks are the ones that are kind of suffering through that. And maybe we could talk a little bit about the lack of Jamal Adams in there, and then having
for sure,
Josh
Jones.
Not adequately fill that, and it's just created a middle of the defense problem, I think, more than anything.
Yeah, and it's really, you touched on a lot of the reasons I was fairly bullish on this defense going into this season. I thought they were going to be young and fast, and I thought there were a couple of things we could count on. I thought we could count on Jordan Brooks being a really solid player in the middle of that defense. He hasn't been. That 51-yard Jamal Williams touchdown run Sunday, it was all on him. He was just blocked one-on-one and couldn't get off his block to get into the gap and hit that run fit. And he wasn't double teamed. He just couldn't get off the block. And we're seeing that a lot. And we're seeing poor tackling out of him and Cody Barton. And that's been Josh Jones's issue. He looked so good in the preseason, but he just can't wrap up and he can't tackle, bounces off guys, and Ryan Neal, maybe taking some of those snaps, but up front too, no one's talking about Poona Ford. And he was a guy that we all loved, coming into this season, and we were happy that they signed him to the extension, and he seemed like an ascending player. But I wonder as a whole, we're touching on a lot of things here that all seem to come back to the same idea, that they've shifted this scheme to more of a traditional 3-4 defense, even though Carroll has always played 3-4 tendencies. And so whereas Poona Ford was always that 3 technique before, that nose guard, now he's playing 3-4 defensive end. And his body type he's not even 6 feet tall. It doesn't really fit the traditional mold in that offense or in that defense. And you touched on it too, that could be a big contributor to Daryl Taylor's problems as well, that maybe they made that switch without ensuring that they had guys that fit that scheme. But you're right, they didn't also protect themselves. I mean, if there's nowhere else to go, Josh Jones isn't playing well, Ryan Neal's healthy now, that's somewhere they can turn. Darrell Taylor's not playing well. They drafted Boye Mafe in the second round. He looks like he's ready for more primetime play. You can turn to him. There are some things they can do on the defensive line. Even they've got some guys coming back in the near future. LJ Collier might be a guy that could help in this scheme this year. He was just designated to return. But if Cody Barton doesn't play well, there's Nick Bellore is your backup. There's nowhere to turn. I don't know why they weren't more aggressive. I know they tried 4 linebackers out this week. But I don't know why they were more aggressive in going after a guy like Blake Martinez, who was just signed by the Raiders to be on their practice squad. Big time player for the Packers, 4 years straight with over 120 tackles. Still just 27 years old, coming off an ACL, but it was early last year, should be fully healthy. I don't know why they weren't aggressively looking for a guy like that, because that's a huge weakness and there's nowhere to turn. I don't know how you fix that.
And I think you kind of alluded to it as far as the scheme and the personnel, matching those things up. That's why and you mentioned also the idea that we just don't have any quick fixes available in those key spots. And that's why I don't know how much improvement we're going to see this year if we stick to the idea of a 3-4 most of the time. Now they mentioned playing in multiple 4-3, 3-4 looks, but do we have the players available to us to be able to plug and play with that? And I'm not sure that we do. You mentioned LJ Collier coming back. That might be an option for them. At least do one thing well on defense. Set the edge and stop the run. You've got to be able to do that. That's one of the core pillars of Pete Carroll's defense. You want to be able to stop the run. That allows the defense to kind of key in on some things that they do well. And right now they're not doing anything. So that's why I think that this is more long-term than we thought, because going into the season, we pointed to the idea that this defense has a chance to be top 15, maybe top 10, especially if the offense started to figure it out, kept the defense off the field. Statistically, this defense could look pretty good. Now this whole thing's completely flipped. The offense looks great.
Yeah.
Who predicted that?
They look like
the defense is struggling. Now they struggled the first 2 years early on in both seasons, but this is kind of inherently a little different than that. Same sort of issues, but different personnel, different defensive scheme, different coaches, same result. So can they fix it this year a little bit? Yeah, they probably can fix it a little bit here and there, dial it in a little bit, change the scheme up somewhat to fit the personnel as things go forward, and possibly get, top 20, 21, 22 overall defense instead of a 31, 32 defense. That would help. If the offense continues to play, they've got an outside shot to get to 7 or 8 wins. If that defense continues to lag like it is, and the offense struggles against better defenses, which to me seems likely, then I still think we're in the 5 to 6 win category. Even though we've got 2 wins now, that would only mean 3 or 4 wins left in the entire season. I know that seems kind of hard to talk about and predict, but you take a look at the schedule, and it is possible if the defense doesn't improve.
Yeah, they look like a Big 12 team on Sunday. Like, who would have thought?
Just giving up tons of yards. I mean, it's fun to watch if you're a fan and you don't care about defense. But, man, if you care about defense, it's so painful.
Yeah. It's brutal. And the game started off well Sunday. I think that 2 of the first 3 Lions drives ended in a punt. And it looked like, gosh, maybe they can kind of keep this under control a little bit. And they were, baby steps. They were a little bit better against the run if you take away the 51-yard run. But then they couldn't, even with all the injuries the Lions had, they couldn't keep TJ Hawkinson in check. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I know there's a lot of criticism out there of Pete Carroll right now because he's a defensive coach, and that's what he's known for. And why is it that these last 3 or 4 seasons, the defense has always started off so poorly, and then it takes until the second half to figure it out? I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know those answers. I'm not a big X and O guy. I just know that to me, it's a talent issue, and it doesn't matter what scheme you're running. You've got to have guys up front that can affect the game and be difficult to game plan for and difficult to block. We don't have those guys. And your linebackers have to be able to make impact plays and impact the line of scrimmage and not just be cleaning stuff up. We don't have those guys. I think we all like the secondary right now, and I think we like it long term. I think heading into this offseason, I don't think that's a really need to address. They haven't even got their full contingent of guys yet. Trey Brown hasn't even played yet. So there's a lot of exciting things happening there, and there's some pieces in place up front. Certainly the Uchenna Nwosu signing was inspired and smart, and shows that front office can identify talent even when it's not big name talent. And he was a guy not a lot of people were familiar with. So there's some pieces there, but let's go back to the offense, because this is a conversation that could be a 2-hour conversation, and we'll try and keep it much shorter than that. But there's so much at work here. And I guess in a general sense, I want to ask you how sustainable you believe it is, because we've seen Geno Smith now as a starting quarterback for the Seahawks in 7 games, right? He started 3 last year. He came in relief of Russ once, right? So we've seen him play 7.5 games essentially. And the only time he really looked ineffective was at San Francisco last year. We don't know how much of that was just hangover, right? That team just looked flat overall coming off the win over the Broncos. And then last year at home against New Orleans, the same defense we're going to face Sunday, very good defense. They kind of throttled and kept the offense in check here at Lumen Field. It was kind of a sloppy game. How legit do you feel what we're seeing from Geno Smith right now is?
Geno Smith's a good quarterback as far as protecting the ball. He's a good check down quarterback. He's a point guard quarterback, as Pete Carroll likes to say. Maybe he's shown a little bit extra beyond that this year, but you take a look at the competition he's done that against. The Falcons and the Lions, both bottom half of the league. You could argue bottom 10th of the league as far as defensive teams are concerned. When you face better play, the Broncos defense in the first game, now he had a great first half, but that second half was really anemic.
Yeah.
When you looked at the 49er game, that was a slog and a struggle. A lot of 3 and outs. Very inefficient game.
Yeah.
He still made good decisions, but there was a lot of dump offs. His yards per attempt was way down. So that's, I think, what we're going to see. We're going to see a team that if we can't run the ball effectively against defenses, we're going to be one-dimensional. If we fall behind against teams, it's going to force Geno to throw the ball. And if you've got a good secondary, he's going to check down and dump the ball off, and we're going to face some 3rd and long situations, which I don't think that we're quite as well equipped to convert against good defenses. And so to me, it's still a mixed bag. Yeah. That's why I'm tempered on the Detroit thing. It feels good. It looks good. It looked great. Statistically, Geno's having a great year. But when you really break it down, you've got to step back a little bit. I don't know if we're going to end up being a top 10 offense at year's end. Top 15? Yeah, I think we can be. But with our defense so poor, we're going to lack the opportunities to be able to have more opportunities to convert 3rd downs, to have more opportunities to score. Yeah. And with limited opportunities, I think that we're going to have limited results. So I see us as being a 500 or less team, even though it feels like we could be more than that. Just the defense is so poor that we're just not going to have those opportunities. Now, I can be proven wrong, and I'd love to be proven wrong.
When you look at what's happening in the division, too. I mean, everyone's 2-2, and the Rams look really disappointing, and people are starting to think that maybe the league has figured Sean McVay's offense out, and Arizona kind of looks like what they are, and that they're not a very good team overall, but Kyler's going to pull some games out here and there, and the 49ers have a great defense, but, they can only go as far as Jimmy Garoppolo is capable of taking them. There's an opportunity, if they continue to play well and pull some games out, to stay in contention in this division for a little while.
And Dan, Geno's looked fantastic. Yeah. I don't want to take anything away from Geno. Geno has surpassed my expectations. Yeah. He looks like a really competent quarterback. He's even, in fact, made me question whether or not we need a franchise quarterback with our first overall pick in the draft
into that. We're going to get into that in a little bit. I want to ask you about that. I planned on,
but you know what I'm saying though. It's like he's making you question everything about the future of the offense, and so but you've got to realize that this came against Detroit. This came against the Falcons, and let's see. I'm open-minded. I want to see Geno do this against the Saints. I want him to see the next game against the 49ers. We've got a game on the road in Germany against the Buccaneers. They've got a great defense this year. Let's see him sustain this sort of thing against really good defenses, top 10 defenses. And then let's see that defense improve a little bit. And this team might have a shot. I don't think they're quite playoff ready this year. To me, they could somehow sneak in if the defense all of a sudden plays really good. Tariq Woolen has 7 interceptions. The defense continues to generate turnovers. This could be the way that they start winning games with the defensive performances. They allow a ton of yards, but they don't allow a ton of points, and that could be the formula.
Well, I appreciate your voice of reason, because I've had to reel myself back in a few times this week, because it is Detroit, and they are most likely the worst defense in the league, right there with the Houston Texans by all metrics and by all statistical measures. But there are some things I'll disagree with you on a couple of points. I think Geno is showing me, and the reason that I've allowed myself to get a little excited about what he can do is he's showing me, and not just against Detroit, but in little flashes in the other games too, that he is getting more aggressive and more comfortable pushing the ball downfield. DK Metcalf was going against one of the best young corners in the league on Sunday in Jeff Okudah. And Geno Smith wasn't shy at all about throwing the ball DK's way, even when he wasn't wide open. And that's something the previous quarterback didn't always do. So I feel like we're seeing some of that. His yards per attempt is much higher than a certain other quarterback that used to play for the Seahawks currently, and we'll get into that in a second. But I'm with you, and thank you again for being the voice of reason. We need to see it this Sunday. I think this is big. Second game straight on the road, coming off a great performance, going up against a very, very good defense, a defense that's good at all levels, and going against one of the elite cornerbacks in the league in Marshawn Lattimore. It's going to be, but that's what this season is, right? We've talked about this. Every single week is a test, and every single week is another little piece of evidence on where they're at and where they should go. And you're right. And I want to emphasize this point, because I'm on record as saying that I was disappointed coming out of training camp that they went with Geno, just because I thought Drew Lock was the younger player. That's where we were at as an organization. Let's give him a shot. I like his ceiling, his upside, and his arm talent. And I thought Geno had a lackluster, kind of boring preseason. But as you mentioned, Carroll's been saying from day one, these are the things we see from this guy in the locker room, in the meeting rooms, on the practice field. Now he's doing it in games. If he continues week after week after week to playing this way, and you have those extra draft picks next year, 2 firsts, 2 seconds, all their native picks after that, and there's all those holes on defense, it does start to shift your thinking, doesn't it? We know the Seahawks don't think like everyone else. And if Geno Smith carries us forward and he finishes the season as a top 7 or 8 quarterback by all the metrics, which right now he is, and he's 31 years old, about to turn 32. That's not old for an NFL quarterback. He has a lot of tread left on the tires after sitting and waiting his turn for 8 years. If he's truly transformed his career, does it maybe create an opportunity for the Seahawks to be a little more patient and maybe take a developmental quarterback, stick more with Geno, and fill those other spaces? Does it change your approach to the draft next year?
That's a very interesting question, a very interesting approach, a prudent approach, I think.
Not what the fans want.
It's true. So the Seahawks currently have the 9th and 12th pick in the first round, if you look at today's record, and the 41st and 43rd picks in the 2023.
And isn't NFL the 9th pick,
draft.
Isn't that Denver's pick?
Yeah, it's funny how things work, isn't it?
Yeah, and listen, so that's not going to get you CJ Stroud or Bryce Young.
Right. Yeah, listen.
You're going to have to trade up if you want to do one of those. And we
Yeah.
just outlined hole after hole after hole after hole. I don't know that they're going to want to mortgage the farm to move up and get one of those guys in a deep quarterback draft. And so maybe you look at a Herndon Hooker or a
Richardson.
Van Dyke or a Richardson if he comes out that some teams might think is too raw to go high.
Yeah.
And it affords you the luxury of you take that guy with the high ceiling, because I'm a huge Anthony Richardson fan.
Yeah.
And he may not choose to come out this year. But if he does, and he's raw and he needs to sit for a year or two, and Geno plays this way or close to it the rest of the year, it does change the formula.
Yeah.
And it eliminates the need to mortgage so many of those draft assets you acquired to move up to get one guy. And you still might be able to have your cake and eat it too, and get a franchise quarterback, and also get a game-wrecking defensive lineman and a guy off the edge and a couple linebackers.
You sent me a note earlier, said we might talk about the biggest draft needs, and the first thing I wrote was game-wrecking defensive tackle.
There you go, Jalen Carter.
So here's the deal. You've hit so many notes that are correct here in the idea that the perfect scenario that the Seahawks would love to have is Geno work. This thing works, right? Okay. So now they've got Geno. You did mention that he's 31. He's going to turn 32 in a couple days. He's going to be 33 years old in next season.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking
that's not your future.
A 3-year deal, maybe a 2-year deal.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And Geno continues to play this way. Yeah. He's not under contract next year. So he's going to have some suitors, as well as the Seahawks would want him back. He's going to be more expensive. However, he would be the perfect quarterback to bridge a draft pick. So you mentioned CJ Stroud. You mentioned Bryce Young. I don't know if you mentioned Will Levis, but he's up there as well, right? Those guys are going to go top 5, top 6 in this draft. Will Anderson's on the other side. Everybody knows about that beast.
Yep.
So he's in contention to be the number 1 overall pick. He would be in contention to be a Seahawks draft pick if this defense continues to struggle the way that they are. So it does provide them some options now. We went into this off-season thinking, oh my goodness, it's going to be Drew Lock or Geno Smith. It's not going to turn out well. We're gonna have 3 wins. We're gonna have 4 wins. We're going to be a top 5 pick guaranteed, and a quarterback's just going to fall to us. Maybe that's not exactly the way it goes. Yeah. And the Seahawks do have some options now, and so they do look at the draft and their entire roster. This isn't just myopically focused on the quarterback position now. It's how do we improve the entire roster? What's the strategy to make this team really good and get an asset that we can build around? And Geno starting 1 more year, not the worst case scenario if he continues to play this way. Also, you bring in that quarterback that's a 2nd, 3rd round guy that you can build around, that you feel really good about. He might not be ready this season, but he's your future. And he comes in, he does the same thing that Alex Smith did with the Kansas City Chiefs, and Patrick Mahomes was sitting there. Yeah. Patrick Mahomes got some great experience sitting back, learning the offense, and they made that transition when they were ready. Seahawks could do the same thing. I think that would be the best case scenario for the Seahawks this offseason. Then you take a look at the draft capital, 9th, 12th, 41st, 43rd picks in the NFL draft, somewhere in there. That's where they're going to be. That's a lot of draft capital, plus their native 3rd round pick. That's 5 picks in the top 75. A lot of those are really early. You're going to get some impact players. Mm-hmm. And if they draft anywhere near where they drafted in 2022, you're going to get some guys that come in right away and start. You need an offensive center, you need a game-wrecking defensive tackle, maybe another edge player, obviously at linebacker and at quarterback. So you've got some positions of need, but they've also got that draft capital sitting there, in addition to having about $30 million in free agency spending. They could probably create another 15 or so by looking at some contracts and making some adjustments there. They go out in free agency and get a guy or two to have an impact. And this really does have an opportunity to change the trajectory of your franchise and get you back playoff bound. And with the assets we've got now, with the tackles and Tariq Woolen, you had Boye Mafe, The future's pretty bright, really, if you can get past this season.
I think you make a really good point. If you look at this as year one of a 2 or 3 year process, there are boxes that have been obviously and clearly and definitively checked so far. Like, and you touched on them.
Yeah, and you couldn't have said that about 4 games into this season. We've already checked boxes. Great.
Yeah. You couldn't have said it last year, the year before that either. There were always, you had Russell Wilson, and he was making a big chunk of the salary cap. You had a franchise quarterback. You had a couple other nice pieces, but then you had these gaping holes at every single position group on the roster. How do you fill them all? It's like the Dutch boy analogy, right? With 11 holes in the dike and 10 fingers. You can't do it. Now it's like, okay, offensive tackle is set. Receiver group, you can always add to that, but set. Tight end group, set. Running back group, set. Secondary, largely set. Couple of impact players on the edge. And so you can really focus on, you touched on it, front seven, interior offensive line, and quarterback. Like, you can narrow your focus to that, and that really allows you can take a quarterback. Even if Geno Smith continues to play well, you bring him back on a 3-year deal, and you're 100% sure he's going to be your opening day starter next year, you can still use one of those 2 first-round picks on a quarterback. You just don't have to leverage 3 or 4 of those picks to move up to get a guy, and then you kind of end up in the same boat you were at, where you have a quarterback you spend a bunch to get, and then you have all these other holes.
How many of those premier quarterbacks turned out last year so far?
Yeah, well,
that was the best quarterback class that we've seen in years, quote unquote. And how many of those guys are really
2020? Yeah,
excelling?
It happens.
It takes a little bit of time.
And for people who say they don't trust, because I'm sure you hear this a lot too. I see it all over the place. I don't trust these guys to find the next quarterback. Really? Let's look at what they've done. And I know where that comes from. It comes from Charlie Whitehurst and Matt Flynn, right? But John Schneider identified Russell Wilson.
He identified Patrick Mahomes and Allen.
Exactly. Targeted him, got him. They were right. They were going to draft Patrick Mahomes if he had slid that year in the draft, even with Russell Wilson. They tried to trade to get Josh Allen with the first pick in the draft. So when Schneider gets his eye on somebody, he's pretty good. And I can see him falling in love with a guy that isn't projected to go in the top 10. And meanwhile, all those other teams, and there's going to be plenty of them this year, they're going to be crawling all over themselves to get up high enough in the draft to get one of those top 3 or 4 guys. So we might be in a position to, okay, maybe we'll trade down a little bit to one of those teams. Maybe we pick up another first rounder next year to even add leverage there, and we still can fill those needs and still get a quarterback. It's a conversation we're going to have a lot over the rest of the season, and certainly
it's a nice conversation to start having now, because I think it becomes relevant now.
It shows you where they're at. It just kind of shows you where they're at after 4 games. There's some things we know, things we didn't know 4 weeks ago.
I completely agree. What is that? You mentioned Russell Wilson. I don't want to get too much into this kind of conversation about Russell Wilson and Denver and whatever.
Let's get into
We're kind of tied to Denver, though.
Yeah, we are.
I mean, we've got a kind of a vested interest in this thing, even though we don't want to. We've got their first round pick. We've got their second round pick. That's 2 high picks in this coming draft. And we're kind of feeling weird about rooting for a team to fail and rooting for a player we kind of loved and did a lot of great things for the Seahawks in this city. And he's struggling. And so how do you feel with that? Are you happy? I'm not necessarily happy.
Here's how I look at it. I look at it as you're in a relationship, right? And maybe the relationship isn't perfect, but man, there's some qualities about that person you really like and you don't want to let go. And so you hang in, you try to make it work. But once it's over and you get some distance and they're in the rearview mirror, you kind of look back and you go, yeah, wow, there were a lot of things I didn't like and I'm better off without him. Look, I love everything about Russell Wilson did for this organization. I have a closet full of his jerseys that I can now not wear until he retires from the league. And I'll always treasure that. But he is a declining player who was not ideal as a fit in this offense. And I want to get into that a little bit. And had gotten to a point where I think he was becoming a problem in the locker room because thought he was bigger than the team and what was happening with the organization. And it was the right time to move on. just like I told you I would tie this back in, just like I was 100% in favor of what the Mariners did in 2018. They did it the exact right time.
By the way,
they had some assets.
You were spot on your Mariners stuff the last 3 years. I just have to say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But there's an analogy to be made. It doesn't look, rebuilds don't always work. And ultimately, if they don't choose the right quarterback when the time is right, this one won't likely work the way we want it to. But the time to move on from Russell Wilson was absolutely spot on. And now we're seeing that every week. He hasn't just gotten off to a slow start. He's not the player he used to be. And that's what the Seahawks front office determined. This is a declining player who's going to want to continue to be paid at the top of the scale in the NFL. And he actually makes it more difficult for us to be effective on offense the way we want to. We're seeing that frustration in Denver now. We're seeing the honeymoon phase is over. Fans, you don't have to look far on social media to see Denver fans complaining about his decisions and where he's going with the football. Certainly there was the end of the game last night against Indianapolis. There's a lot of criticism, and it's warranted. He's not ever going to be again the player that he was. And so what they were able to acquire for him was a no-brainer. And so I'm not hoping on him to fail. I'm not glad that he failed last night, that he made a horrible decision on that 4th down play and could have won the game for them. KJ Hamler was wide open.
Yes, he was.
But he never looked his way. He decided
that should have been his early look. He should have been looking at that. Yeah,
he never looked that way. He didn't read the coverage. He had decided before the ball was snapped.
That's exactly.
He was going to throw to Cortland Sutton, no matter what. And we've seen that over and over. And you look at now, you juxtapose that with what's happening with Geno Smith. Is Geno Smith as talented as Russell Wilson? No. But we're seeing throws now that are part of the offense, that are effective throws that make a defense have to defend the entire field that we haven't seen for the last 11 years because they weren't throws he was comfortable making or didn't like to make or didn't see. And it's how this offense is operating right now. For all the times we questioned, maybe Shane Waldron's not the guy last year. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful thing to watch. This is the offense I've been wanting to see. And we have a guy that's capable of operating it efficiently.
Yes.
If we can see it operate efficiently this week against a good defense, I'll get even more excited. But it's a fun offense when everything's working.
Dan, you touched upon so many things. It's
what I do.
It's crazy to wrap your brain around everything you just talked about as far as the Russell Wilson saga that we've kind of seen play out. At least let's just narrow it down to over the last couple of seasons, and the struggles, the victories, the great plays, the frustrating things, the things that you wanted to see but never saw inside the offense, the handpicked Shane Waldron offensive coordinator situation, and then have that not really work last year. And you just kind of knew, as somebody that watches football all the time, you just kind of knew that it was off, that it was not structured that way, and we were operating out of some sort of hybrid thing. It was the Russell Wilson show, and that's the way it was. And you had to kind of take it that way because on balance, Russell gave you a little bit more than he didn't give you. And so you lived and died with his decision making. And most of the times it worked out, especially when we had a solid defense. When we didn't have a solid defense, it didn't work so well. And he got it hurt last year. You don't want to completely count that against him, but we ended up with 7 wins. And it's frustrating because now you're kind of seeing this play out in Denver. And you're also seeing this play out with the Seahawks. And you're seeing Shane Waldron's offense and the way that he constructs things, the way that he sets up the field in layers, in levels, first level, second level, third level, and have everything work together out of 2 or 3 formations, and have the defense struggle to kind of identify where things are going to come from. Mm-hmm. And then Geno operate within that to be able to take crossing routes, to be able to use the tight ends the way that they were designed to be used, to what the opportunities to give DK Metcalf throws in space where DK can use that athleticism. The same thing with Tyler Lockett. So those are all exciting. And then the run game kind of opens up. It's kind of a reverse thing. Run game kind of opens up because everything's open. So when you're spreading the offense out like that, you all of a sudden have these cutback lanes that weren't there prior. So it's working really well.
Aren't we also seeing significant evidence that despite what many Seahawks fans think could ever be possible, that Pete Carroll has truly ceded autonomy of the offensive play calling to Shane Waldron? Because when you look, and he spent this entire offseason, just like he did the one before it and the one before that, talking about how they want to run the football and everything's based off that. Their run-pass mix right now, again, they look like a Big 12 team. They're throwing the football on early downs as much as any team in the league right now. They're in the top 10 for sure. I think it's higher than that. They're throwing the ball more than they're running it. They're doing what the game flow calls for and what the defense, what works against that defense and what they think is going to work. That was never the Pete Carroll way. There were times, and we've all seen it, where he would run to a fault, run on first down, run on second down, power running inside, and then try to convert third down. It makes you wonder if there was a lack of trust there before. And it's kind of ironic that there would be more trust now. But it's not what we expected from Pete Carroll. And to me, it does indicate that he is letting Shane Waldron absolutely run the show on offense, despite perceptions that some people have out there of how he likes to meddle in the offense.
Yeah. And you can say the same thing about the defense this year. So he gave the autonomy to Shane Waldron last year. He made two gutsy calls with regards to the coaching staff in 2 consecutive years. He gave the offense a new life last year. I think that was really forward thinking. Everyone thought that Pete Carroll was interfering too much. This was part of the process. Same old Pete, holding back the offense and so forth. He went away from that, and he gave somebody the keys to the car there. Same thing on defense this year. He went away from his longtime partner in crime in Ken Norton Jr., and he did go with Clint Hurt, somebody that knew the defensive scheme and was well respected in the building and by all players, by all accounts. But he also brought in Sean Desai and Carl Scott in the secondary, 2 outside voices. And those 3 coaches combined were Vic Fangio guys. And they knew that system like bread and butter, and new terminology, new expectations, putting players in position to be successful. And Pete stepped back. And that's a big move for Pete Carroll to make. Now, there's some Pete Carroll detractors out there. That's okay. But you need to give Pete credit where he's due. And those decisions, combined with this Geno Smith decision, are just solidify him in there as being just a really good coach, a forward-thinking coach, a coach that's not boxed in by his priors, that he is willing to change and willing to make changes that are a benefit of the entire organization and the team. And so far, I'm impressed. Now, the defense, again, has lots of room to grow and improve. And I think that will happen given enough time. I'm hoping that they do have enough time to kind of put this thing into motion over the course of the next year or 2. But man, hats off, I think, to those decisions, because I think those set the core, and then the Russell Wilson trade. That sets the course for the next 3 or 4 years for this organization, and it needed to happen. You mentioned the timing on the Russell Wilson trade as being absolutely optimal. I completely agree. We got the highest value at the most optimal time on a quarterback that was giving you diminishing returns, but you found an organization that still believed that he was at the premier top of his game. And quite honestly, I hope that he is. I hope that he still has that. They find it. He generates next he year. Becomes right. He becomes the quarterback that I think that he still is. That cliff, there's something in between here. I don't think that the cliff is as sharp as it seems right now, but they're sure struggling. But I think it's a home run of a trade for the Seattle Seahawks. At least it looks like that right now.
Well, I think you're also seeing something else at play here too. It's a huge factor Sunday to Sunday in the NFL, and that's pressure. And sometimes lack of pressure can be freeing, and pressure can suffocate you. And right now, the pressure on him and Denver and Nathaniel Hackett, and the pressure in there and make that work is palpable, and it's thick, and the fans are letting him know it. Whereas there's no pressure here, and Geno can play free and easy, and we can experiment with personnel and packages and scheme and all of that. Because if we do go 5-12, nobody's losing their job. Everything is on track. So, that can be a factor. Let's talk about this week before we wrap this up, because we've talked about how this is a key matchup, and the thing I like about this matchup is, yes, we're going up against one of the better defenses in the league in New Orleans. They have outstanding front seven. They have Marshawn Lattimore and a good secondary. They can get after the passer. They can defend the run. But their offense is pretty broken right now. And we don't know yet if we're going to see Jameis Winston or Andy Dalton. Alvin Kamara was back at practice this week in a limited capacity. Michael Thomas, again, what else is new, is hurt. And they really lack some weapons there on the outside. They're not the dynamic offense that we came to know under Sean Payton during the days when Drew Brees was there. And so it does present, I think, an opportunity for the Seahawks to maybe get some things right on defense. And if they can be effective, get a win. Because to me, and we may say this every week this year, this may be the most pivotal week on the schedule. If they win this game, if they can find a way to win this game, go to 3-2, I don't hate our chances coming home next week against Arizona. You get to 4-2. You see what I'm saying? Like, this week might be, and then there's some games after that look pretty favorable too. This week could be kind of a turning point, or a tipping point, might be more accurate to say, as far as what our draft position ends up being and kind of where we head in the division and things like that.
It's funny you said that, because I think I said the same thing on our show the last couple of weeks. This Falcons game, Falcons at Seahawks. If they lose at home to the Falcons, what does that say about the team? Well, if they lose on the road to the worst defense in the NFL, what does that say about?
If they win Sunday, we're going to be like, oh, if they can just beat the Cardinals, go to 4-2. This changes everything.
It is kind of funny how that works, and as far as a team that's on the verge of going one way or the other. They're 2-2, but it's more than just the record. It's literally this team could fall. The schedule doesn't get any easier. You got the Saints, then you've got the you mentioned the Cardinals. The Cardinals, I'm waiting kind of for them to kind of have a better season. It looks like they're not a very good team this year. The Chargers are going to be tough. The Giants come, that seems like a winnable game, but who knows, right? So it doesn't get any easier. And then you've got the Cardinals again, then you've got the Buccaneers. And it just doesn't get any easier. And so we'll see. Yeah. So this game, interesting. You're right. They struggle on offense a little bit. Who knows what's going to happen? Andy Dalton looks like he might go. They look like they're going to have Alvin Kamara back. They lack a few weapons on offense, although Chris Olave, their first round draft pick this year, is their stud now at wide receiver. So they're missing Thomas a little bit less. And then, they've got some opportunities at the tight end position on defense. I think they're solid. They're not as great as they have been in the past, but they've got a nice pass rush there on defense. And last week, I think they combined against the Vikings for 10 pressures and a sack between Cameron Jordan and the other fellow they've got in there. I lost his name. But they're a decent defense. And the best defense we've faced since the 49ers. And it'll be interesting to see how consistent they can take Geno's game and take the offense and take Penny's running effort and try to duplicate that against a better defense. A better defense that's more equipped to stop what they're trying to do. You mentioned Lattimore earlier at cornerback against one-on-one matchups with DK Metcalf. That's going to be a fascinating matchup to watch, and I'm kind of excited about that. I want to see what they can do against a decent defense. Now, on the defensive side of the ball for the Seahawks, I just want them to slow them down. I want him to slow him down a little bit. Maybe force some 3 and outs. We haven't seen too many of those yet this year. And there's some
side. Yeah, they're just
there's some opportunities, but the turnovers and special teams, I think, is going to be a factor in this game. You've seen New Orleans this year turn the ball over 2 times in 3 out of the last 4 games.
Yeah.
You've seen them miss some field goals. I think their field goal kickers missed a field goal in each of their 4 games. So this could come down to a 1-score game, as a lot of scores do in the NFL. And I think for the Seahawks to come out on the winning side, they're going to need to take advantages of a couple of turnovers if they get them. And if they do get them in good field position, I trust the offense to come away with points. I do, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I do believe, though, it comes down to protecting the ball.
Here might be an opportunity. So the Saints, just looking it up, overall yardage given up so far on defense are 10th in the league overall. They're number 8 against the pass, so good test for Geno Smith, but they're 19th in the league against the run.
Yes.
Seahawks look like they were kind of getting their running game going a little bit against Detroit. We saw Rashad Penny have a breakout game. He ran hard. He ran physical. He's a guy, to me, Rashad Penny's interesting because I don't think there's any surprise that he finished strong last year, because what I've noticed from him, whether it's at the beginning of the season or he's coming back from injury, is he's like a pitcher who gets by on feel. Like, he has to get reps in order for that vision that he has to kind of lock in and get a rhythm and really start to feel the game and let it come to him and feel the flow. And he just didn't seem to have that. He ran hard the first 3 weeks. He ran very hard. But he just wasn't feeling the hole. He wasn't feeling the cutback lane. He sure looked like that on Sunday. He seemed to get stronger as the game goes along. And I think we might be on the verge of seeing Rashad Penny maybe get back to where he can carry this running game a little bit over the next couple of weeks. And maybe that's the opportunity this week, with the Saints kind of being in the bottom third of the league against the run.
Yeah, I think Tuttle in the middle for them, defensive tackle, is a vulnerable spot for them. I think Jordan and Davenport on the edges give them great pass rush, but not so much setting the edge. And they've got some great linebackers. I think their linebacker crew is one of the best in the NFL. Werner's back there, Pete Werner. Davis is back there, and they do a good job filling holes and tackling. But if you can get to the second level, I think Penny's shown that he's a dynamic guy, can make almost anybody miss. Yeah. And he's a big physical guy, but a lot bigger than you think he is just by looking at him. He's almost 235 pounds. And but he's just as agile and quick as he was last year in that great stretch. And that kind of came back. You kind of had flashbacks of last year with Rashad Penny exactly in that Lions game. And I would like to see that again. I think that's the key to this game, really. Beyond the turnovers, you got to establish that run. Now, I know that's a cliche in the NFL, but you've got to get that run game going, because you're giving your defense an opportunity to stay off the field. And that's huge for the Seattle Seahawks this year. And so if you can win the time of possession game, and if you can march the Seahawks down the field, convert third downs at a 50% clip in this game, you've got a real good shot to win.
Well, it kind of gets me back to my earlier point that what I love that we're seeing out of this offense is it's so varied that as you think about now what it must be like for an opposing defensive coordinator to put a game plan together. When you're facing Russell Wilson, you could focus on a couple of key areas that you knew the Seahawks were going to attack. And if you took those away, made it real hard on our offense. There were lots of 3 and outs over the last couple of years. Who are you going to prepare for now? You're gonna really try to sell out to get after Geno Smith because you think there's an opportunity to put pressure on him. Okay, well, you're gonna have to deal with him dumping it off to the tight ends and the backside of the backfield, and those 2 rookie tackles haven't been giving up a lot of pass pressures. You're gonna load up to try and stop Rashad Penny because you think, oh, they're getting that game going. They're getting that going again now. You got to deal with Lockett and Metcalf and Smith having success pushing the ball down the field to those guys. So it's a fun time to watch this offense. And again, we're just going to kind of, take week by week. And hopefully what'll happen is the Mariners will just sweep and win today and tomorrow. And then, because it's an 11 o'clock start if there's a game 3 Sunday, and I don't want to have to flip back and forth and watch both games. I just want to be able to focus.
That's funny. Well, maybe they can pull the Seahawks ahead and just get them a win just by virtue of attrition there. Right. It's interesting. What do you think about this game? Like, is it going to be a high scoring affair like we saw against the Lions? Are you thinking about a slog here where it's a low scoring game, one score, depends on who's got the ball at the end?
I think it's gonna be more like that. I think it's gonna be more of maybe a like a 21-17 game, or 19 to 14, something like that.
Saints have been struggling to score. The Seahawks have really been scoring some points, 27, 28 points a game or whatever. I kind of see it that way, but it's tough. It's hard to predict against the Seahawks. I just feel like the Seahawks are going to go back and forth this year. Just going to kind of be this team that's great one week and not so good the next week. It's so easy to get excited about that Lions thing because it's so much offense, 550 yards of total offense. I imagine we'll come back down to earth. It'll be closer to 300 and 350 yards of offense for the Seahawks. But it really depends on if the Seahawks are able to punch the ball in for touchdowns rather than settling for field goals. And I'm thinking it's going to be in that 23-20 range, and it will come down to kind of what we do at the end.
It's just like every week's going to be this year. I just can't wait. I can't wait to see what happens. It's like a giant experiment, and I just want to see what happens each week, which young players step up, see some growth. We're going to see some setbacks. I look forward to it. I always look forward to talking to you, Bill Alvstad, co-host of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. You can find that on all the big podcast platforms. You can also follow Bill on Twitter at Northwest Seahawk. And I noticed this today. It speaks to how long you and I have been on Twitter, that we are able to have Twitter handles like Seahawks Forever and Northwest Seahawk. Like, we got in on the ground floor.
That's funny. Well, thanks for having me on. I truly appreciate it. It's always great to talk to you. We've mentioned this before. You mentioned it at the top. We could talk for 3 hours about Seahawks and just sit at a bar, have a few beers, and literally not run out of things to talk about. So it's always great to be on. I appreciate the opportunity. I really do.
Well, we will do that when I come down for spring training this spring to watch the I don't want to get crazy and say the World Series champion Mariners, but the soon-to-be World Series champion Mariners, because I think as we share a beer and talk about spring training next year,
that would be fantastic.
We'll be looking at a legitimate contender. Nice. Again, good to have you on. Thanks for your thoughts, Bill, and we'll talk soon. We'll catch up again later this year. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Oh, my music ended right just there. I might have to tag a little bit more on. Hey, we made it right at an hour. That's pretty good for us. Oh, hey, buddy.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's always a good time, good show. I'm excited about the Mariners. I'll be honest, I gave up on them for a while after
June when they were 10 games below 500 and couldn't score. Yeah, they were.
Yeah, they just made some bad decisions, with management and with general managers and with managers on the field and personnel trades. But this year, and you mentioned it, you've been right on the button the last 3 years as far as what the franchise is trying to do. And that it was going to be a 2 or 3 year project, and you nailed it. You said last year when they looked like they were ready to compete, you were just like, they're going to be fun to watch, but next year's the year. And sure enough, you just nailed it.
And I'll say that same thing again, because now we're in a position where like players want to be here. Luis Castillo, could have played out one more year with us after we acquired him and gone on the open market and gotten $300 million. But after Julio signed, he called his agent and said, I want to stay here, work out a deal. And he signed for 5 more years at market value, but like a bargain for us, it's going to prove to be. And we're going to be able to go out this offseason and we need bats. And there's some big time shortstops out there. We're going to get one of those guys because now people want to be a part of this. Like the culture's good and the manager, everybody loves the manager and the GM knows what he's doing. And the ownership has shown that they're willing to spend.
So what do you think about a couple of the injuries that they're facing right here at the top of this series here?
We're going to miss Haggerty. He's such a spark plug. But I think the more important point is it looked like that last week or so that some of the bats that had been hurt and been away and been struggling were starting to come around. Mitch Haniger really struggled at the end of September. His bats really come to life in the last week. Julio came off the injured list on Monday like he hadn't missed a beat. Ty France starting to come around. Cal Raleigh.
What are you expecting from Kalenic in this series?
I'm not.
I mean, you had nothing a month ago, and here he is.
He's a different player. His approach is better. His swing's better. I think his mindset's a little better. He's just a guy that's a victim of his own competitiveness. He just puts way too much pressure on himself. And he grips the bat too tight. And he wants to hit a home run on every play. But I think he's one of those guys. I have no expectations of him. I think he's
right. I think that's the best way to approach this.
He is absolutely. They were talking about it on MLB Network this morning. Like, who are some guys? Because every year there's some guy you've never heard of that hits a couple of home runs. That Randy Rosarina for the Rays a couple of years ago. Guys like that. Cody Ross. Guys that have big moments and make a name for themselves. They were like, who are some of those guys? And one guy mentioned Cal Raleigh, but I'm like, he kind of had his moment already. Kelenic could totally be that guy. He could be that guy that doesn't really do anything. Maybe he goes 1 for 4 in game 1 and we win it behind Castillo. And then game 2, he comes up, with a runner on and in a tie game in the 7th inning and hits one out. Like, I could see him rising to the occasion and having some big moments.
What are you expecting from Toronto?
Where
are they
I'll
good?
Say this. They bashed the ball. They hit the ball out of the ballpark. They got Vlad Guerrero. And
so this is a great matchup.
Yeah. It's
the strength of the team, Seattle's pitching versus
our pitching
meat and potatoes
can play with anyone. And it'd be tough for us to go to the ALCS, because if we get past this series, we have to fly right to New York or Houston, and they're rested. And so they're throwing Verlander or Cole against our number 4 guy. And that would be tough if it comes to that. But our pitching, we can beat anyone if we just, get a little bit of offense. And I feel like Castillo's going to show up today and we're going to win game 1. That's how I feel. I think Castillo is a guy that's loves moments like these, and he's pretty special. And
wow.
And their guy is good too, but
I wasn't even going to watch the game. I was going to get back to doing some work but I think I'm going to bug out. It's Friday, right?
I'm pissed at myself because I got they're opening up T-Mobile Park and they're going to have viewing parties on the big screen, and so I bought tickets for Sunday in case there's a game 3, thinking that, I don't work Sundays and the Seahawks play, but I can watch it on my phone or whatever. But I had signed up we're not open on Sundays, but we're doing a private event on Sundays on this Sunday. And I'd signed up for it thinking it was later in the day, but it's not. And so,
oops.
But I've got someone lined up. If the Mariners, if they end up playing a game 3, I've got someone on deck that'll take that party for me if I want to go to the game instead.
So if there's one thing that we missed talking about today, what was the thing that you would hope that we touched on?
I think we covered it all, really. Maybe you touched on it, but maybe we could have spent more time. I think it's being swept under the rug how important Jamal Adams was to this run defense, and that he could have cleaned up a lot of this stuff.
I think it's spending more time talking about how good Abe Lucas has been.
He's been great.
It's just
better
crazy.
Than Todd, really.
I think it's actually covered up for how bad Gabe Jackson is at right.
You were talking about tracks. That's a guy that needs to go. They need to,
I agree. They're going to eat $3 million, but they're going to save 10.
Right.
You got to do that.
Yeah. There's a reason the Raiders are so willing to, they were going to cut him if we hadn't traded for him. Right. But that one stinks. Damian Lewis is service.
I'd like to see Damian Lewis head back over to the right side, to be honest, and get Haynes over there at left guard and see how that works.
Maybe that's the move. And you almost, I never wish for injuries, but you almost kind of hope Jackson rolls an ankle or something and just has to miss a couple of weeks.
Well, and then Jake Curhan. Come on.
Play that spot too.
I agree. I think, if you want to start running the ball and just dominating guys, you put Jake Curhan over there with Abe Lucas, and holy shit.
I thought it was interesting that they brought Joey Hunt back, because I think if Blythe were to get hurt, I think I'd feel better about Hunt than
he's Hunt. Yeah, but he's Austin Blythe part 2.
Yeah,
undersized, going to get overwhelmed by Aaron Donald. We can look forward to that game.
Kyle Fuller just stinks.
Fuck. Yeah, true. Well,
I don't know if he's in shape or anything, and he feels like he's getting blackballed. But like, if we did have an injury, like if Blythe went down, I wonder if they'd call JC Treader. Like, he thought he still wants to play. You know,
interesting.
One of the best damn centers in the league. But
boy, if there's a position that you need to be in shape for, it's week 6 in the NFL. I mean, Jesus.
Yeah.
But anyway,
all right, man. I will get this. This will be up in about a half an hour, and then I'll send it out, and you can repost.
I'll promote it. I will be on there with you, man, for sure. Thanks, dude. It was fun. Enjoyed the conversation. See ya.
As always.